Some secrets are poison not because they're kept, but because of what happens when they finally bleed out. My name is Anna, and for 27 years, I thought my life was built on a simple, sturdy truth. I was the girl adopted from a world I couldn't remember into a family I adored with every fiber of my being. I was also the only black face in a loving but entirely white sea of relatives, a detail that has quietly, and sometimes loudly, defined how I navigate the world. This duality fueled me, made me relentlessly driven, perhaps even a little obsessed with carving out my own space at Sterling Finch, a financial firm so steeped in tradition its mahogany walls seemed to weep with the ghosts of long-dead Wall Street titans. But then, on a Tuesday afternoon that began like any other, the bedrock of my entire existence began to fracture. It didn't start with a dramatic explosion or a shouted confession. It started with a question. A simple, curious question I asked in a room full of powerful men. A question that was met with a sudden, dismissive wave of laughter that echoed with an ugliness I knew all too well. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. Helps a lot. They believed my question was naive, the misstep of a junior analyst who hadn't yet learned her place. They saw me, and perhaps they only saw a young black woman, an outsider who had wandered too far into their hallowed halls. They were profoundly, catastrophically wrong. That single, unassuming question ignited a 72-hour countdown, a ticking clock that would detonate a chain of events so explosive it would unravel a conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 3 decades. It would expose a heartbreaking lie my own family had guarded for my entire life, and it would reveal a truth about my adoption, about my very origins, that was more staggering and more insane than anything my mind could have ever conceived. They weren't just laughing at my question. They were laughing at a billion-dollar secret they believed was buried forever. A secret that had my name written all over it. And by Friday, the laughter had stopped for good. Section 1. The question and the laughter. The main conference room at Sterling Finch is an architectural masterpiece of intimidation. It's designed to make you feel insignificant. The walls are paneled in wood so dark it absorbs the light. The mahogany table is a polished battlefield stretching on for what feels like a mile, and the stern, oil-painted portraits of the firm's founders stare down from on high, their dead eyes judging your every move. The air itself feels heavy, scented with old money, leather, and an unspoken code of conduct. I was, as usual, the youngest person at that table, and to absolutely no one's surprise, the only person of color. I had grown accustomed to it. As a black woman raised by a white family, you develop a sixth sense for navigating spaces where you are the exception to every rule. You learn to be sharper, to anticipate questions before they're asked, to be so over-prepared that no one can ever question your right to be there. I had poured every ounce of that relentless energy into my job, earning a reputation for being meticulous, almost pathologically obsessive with my research. That Tuesday afternoon, we were gathered for a legacy review meeting, which is just high-level corporate jargon for an extended session of patting ourselves on the back. The agenda item was the firm's archival protocols, a topic so profoundly dull it could make a triple-shot espresso turn to dust in your cup. A senior vice president named Mark was leading the presentation. He had that particular kind of smile that never quite reaches his eyes, a polished veneer of charm that couldn't hide the raw ambition underneath. He wore his success like a bespoke suit, perfectly tailored and effortlessly displayed. His father, Walter Finch, was the firm's chief financial officer, a little biographical detail Mark never bothered to mention, but everyone in the room knew it was the silent, powerful engine propelling his career forward. As Mark droned on, clicking through slides of dusty ledgers and organizational charts, a footnote from a 1995 document snagged my attention. Hemlock Legacy Protocol. See Archival Annex 7B. The name itself was strange. Partly poetic, partly menacing. Hemlock. It felt out of place in the sterile language of finance. And underneath, in print so small it was almost an afterthought, it read, "Subject to 72-hour automated review upon inquiry." I had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, cross-referencing every document I could get my hands on. I had never seen a single mention of it. It was a loose thread in a perfectly woven tapestry. It was an error in the matrix. "Mark," I said, and my voice sliced through the stale air, clearer and louder than I'd intended. All 16 pairs of eyes, all white, all male, save for one other woman in her late 50s, swung towards me. "Could you elaborate on the Hemlock Legacy Protocol? I couldn't find any public or internal records on it, and a 72-hour automated trigger seems unusual for a dormant protocol." A profound, dead silence fell over the room, stretched for 1 second, then 2. Then a low chuckle erupted. Came from Mark. He looked at me, a condescending smirk spreading across his face, as if I'd just asked where the bathroom was in the middle of a eulogy. "The Hemlock Protocol," he repeated, dragging the name out as if tasting an amusing, exotic word. "Anna, you've been with us, 2 years? Some things are just institutional history. Old footnotes from a bygone era. Nothing you need to trouble yourself with." His chuckle was the permission slip. It was the signal. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a cascade of little snickers and stifled laughs from around the table. It was a corrosive, familiar sound, a cocktail of dismissal and smug superiority that I have known my entire life. It was the same laugh I heard on the elementary school playground when I tried to explain that my mom, bless her heart, didn't know how to do my braids correctly. It's the sound of being patted on the head and told you're cute, but the adults are talking now. A hot flush of shame and pure, unadulterated anger crept up my neck. They weren't just dismissing my question. They were dismissing me. In their eyes, I wasn't a sharp analyst who had spotted an anomaly. I was a young black woman who had spoken out of turn. I held his gaze, refusing to look away. "Respectfully, Mark, the document is on the agenda for a legacy review. By definition, that makes it relevant. An automated 72-hour trigger doesn't sound dormant. Sounds active. What does it do?" His smile vanished. Instantly. The amusement was gone, replaced by a flash of raw annoyance. "It's an old system failsafe, Anna. It is obsolete. The trigger is a relic of antiquated code that probably doesn't even work anymore. Now, if we can return to the actual agenda." He pointedly turned back to his presentation. The laughter died, but the humiliation remained, hanging in the air like thick smoke. I leaned back in my leather chair, his condescending tone ringing in my ears. But beneath the sting of it all, a different feeling was beginning to bloom. Cold, hard suspicion. His answer was too quick, too practiced. He hadn't just dodged the question. He had violently shut it down. He and the others, they had laughed. But it wasn't a genuine laugh of amusement. It was the nervous, defensive laugh of gatekeepers. It was the sound of people guarding a very old, very big secret. I looked down at my notepad and circled the words. Hemlock Legacy Protocol. 72 hours. I had no idea what it meant. But I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't obsolete. And their laughter didn't end the conversation. Just started a clock. Section 2. The haunting and the first clue. That laughter became a specter, following me out of the conference room and clinging to me all afternoon. It sat beside me in the sterile quiet of my cubicle, a cold, heavy weight in the pit of my stomach. Humiliation is a uniquely cruel emotion. It doesn't just make you question what you did, it makes you question who you are. All my life, I've battled the quiet, pervasive assumption that I don't quite belong. When you're adopted, there's a permanent awareness that a fundamental piece of your personal history is a blank page. When you're a black child raised in an all-white family, you learn from a very young age how the outside world perceives you, and how often its perception is jarringly, painfully wrong. In that room, I wasn't a top-performing analyst at Sterling Finch. I was just the adopted girl asking a silly question. I tried to lose myself in my work, to find refuge in the familiar comfort of spreadsheets and market analyses, but my mind was a broken record, replaying Mark's condescending smirk and the chorus of snickers that had endorsed it. The reaction felt deeply, unsettlingly personal. Why would a simple, procedural question about a protocol from a quarter-century ago provoke such a visceral response? The more I dissected it, the less sense it made. Unless, of course, the protocol wasn't the issue. Unless I was. Unless they were desperately hiding something. That night, I stayed late, long after the last of my colleagues had departed for their comfortable suburban lives. The office transformed after hours, the bustling energy replaced by the low, monastic hum of the servers and the whisper of the ventilation system. I told myself I was just getting a head start on a new project, but it was a lie I didn't even try to believe. I was a moth drawn to a flame, utterly consumed by that footnote. I logged into the firm's internal archive, a vast, labyrinthine digital library containing decades of corporate history, and typed Hemlock Legacy Protocol into the search bar. One result. A single, heavily restricted file. A red banner flashed across my screen. Access denied. And below it, a log entry. File sealed under August 1995 archival lockdown. An archival lockdown. At a fortress like Sterling and Finch. This was a company that prided itself on its stoicism, on weathering world wars, market crashes, and federal investigations with a stiff upper lip and an unwavering calm. The idea of them panicking to such a degree that they'd locked down their own records was inconceivable. Something catastrophic must have happened in August 1995. Something they had to bury so deep it could never be found. Attached to the sealed file was a second, smaller one. It was encrypted, its name a meaningless string of characters, but its creation date was identical. August 1995. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the cavernous silence. This wasn't some obsolete footnote. This was a locked and bolted door, and someone had just tried to tell me it didn't exist. On a whim, I ran a basic decryption program on the smaller file, a simple script I'd learned in a college coding elective. The second I hit enter, my screen flickered violently. A new email popped into my inbox. The sender was anonymous. The subject line was blank. The message contained only 4 words. Let sleeping dogs lie. True bone-deep chill shot down my spine. This wasn't an automated warning. This was a person. Someone was watching my activity on the server. Right now. My innocent curiosity had just tripped a silent, invisible alarm. I slammed my laptop shut, the sharp sound echoing in the massive, empty office. My hands were shaking. I threw my belongings into my bag and practically ran out of the building, the unnerving sensation of unseen eyes on my back every step of the way. The first thing I did when I got inside my apartment and bolted the door was call my parents. My mom, a woman whose boundless warmth could melt glaciers, answered on the second ring. I tried to recount the day's events, the meeting, the condescending laughter. I attempted to frame it as a funny, absurd office story, but my voice began to tremble with the lingering humiliation. It just felt so belittling, you know? I finished, feeling weak and childish. "Oh, honey, don't you let those stuffy old suits get to you," she said, her voice a familiar, comforting blanket. "You are smarter and more capable than all of them put together, and they know it." "It was just about this weird thing I asked about," I said, trying to steer the conversation, needing to know. "Something that happened at the firm way back in 1995. There was a pause. It was so brief, a microsecond of dead air, but it was there. The normal background sounds of her kitchen, the clinking of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator, just stopped. 1995. My mom repeated. Her voice had changed. The warmth was still present, but it was stretched thin, like a worn fabric pulled taut over something sharp and jagged. That was the year we adopted you, Anna." Course I knew that. I was adopted in the fall of 1995. It was the foundational fact of my life. But the way she said it, the tiny, sharp intake of breath she took before speaking, made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "Yeah, I know," I said slowly, cautiously. "This was about something specific at the firm in August of 95. They used the term archival lockdown." Another pause, this one longer, heavier. I could hear my dad's muffled voice in the background, asking who was on the phone. "Mom, is everything okay?" Yes, of course, sweetie," she said, her voice suddenly, unnaturally bright. "It was just a very emotional year for us, that's all. Bringing you home was the single greatest thing that ever happened to us. Hearing that year it brings up a lot of memories. It was a perfectly logical, perfectly reasonable explanation. And every instinct in my body screamed that it was completely and utterly false. I had the exact same feeling I'd had in that conference room, the chilling sensation of a truth being deliberately, skillfully obscured. My parents had always been an open book about my adoption. They'd shared the little they knew. My birth mother was young, the adoption was closed for her privacy. They were chosen from a long, hopeful list. They had always answered my questions with honesty and love. But tonight, for the very first time, I felt a wall go up between us. The year 1995 wasn't just a nostalgic memory for her. It was a trigger, just like it was for the men at my office. And then a terrifying, world-tilting thought crashed into me. What if these two secrets, the one buried at Sterling Finch and the one in my own family, were connected? Section 3, The Pressure Mounts. Wednesday morning, walking into the office felt like wading through thick, charged air. The usual chorus of good mornings was strained, and I noticed how people's eyes would meet mine for a fraction of a second before darting away. The story of my naive question had clearly completed its lap around the firm. I was no longer just Anna the analyst. I was a curiosity, a cautionary tale. Mark walked past my desk without a single word, but the look he shot me was pure ice. The amusement from yesterday was gone. This was something else. This was anger. The message was unmistakable. I had trespassed. Around noon, he materialized at my cubicle, leaning against the partition in a failed attempt at casualness. His shoulders were wound as tight as banjo strings. "Anna," he began. His voice lowered to a conspiratorial murmur. "I feel like there was a misunderstanding yesterday. You're ambitious, I get that. I respect it. But at a place like Sterling Finch, you have to understand there's a certain decorum, a respect for the past. You don't go poking around in sealed history. It's not a good look for your career trajectory. So much for a veiled threat." This was as blunt as a hammer. "I was just doing my job, Mark," I said, fighting to keep my voice even and professional. "Understanding the firm's history, all of it, is part of due diligence." "Some history is above your pay grade," he snapped, his mask of civility finally cracking to reveal the raw aggression beneath. "Drop it. That's not a suggestion. That's advice from someone who knows how this place works." He stormed off, leaving my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just about protecting the firm's reputation. This was intensely personal for him. His reaction was wildly disproportionate to my question. Whatever secret was locked away in that 1995 file, he was desperate to keep it buried 6 feet under. His threat, however, had the opposite of its intended effect. Galvanized me. It transformed my suspicion into certainty. If they were willing to intimidate an employee over a 25-year-old secret, it had to be a secret of monumental importance. The anonymous email, Mark's escalating threats, my own parents' strange evasive behavior on the phone, they were all puzzle pieces, scattered and disconnected, but I knew they belonged to the same picture. I also knew I couldn't solve it alone. That encrypted file was the key, and I needed a master locksmith. That afternoon, I took a long lunch and used a burner phone to arrange a meeting with a man named David Chen, a private investigator specializing in digital forensics. I'd found his name on a secure network used by investigative journalists. His office was a tiny, cluttered space above a noodle shop in Chinatown, a chaotic jungle of whirring server towers, tangled wires, and monitors displaying scrolling lines of code. He was a small, unassuming man in his 40s, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. I laid out the entire story: the meeting, the laughter, the hemlock protocol, the sealed file, the anonymous email. The only thing I held back was the part about my parents. That felt too raw, too personal to share with a stranger. David listened patiently, his fingers steepled, not uttering a single word until I was finished. When I was done, he nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Corporate cover-ups are my bread and butter," he said, his voice calm and steady. This one smells big. The 95 encryption will be ancient by today's standards, but they'll have layered modern security protocols on top of it. It'll take time to peel back the layers. And it won't be cheap. I don't care what it costs, I said, and the conviction in my own voice surprised me. I need to know what's in that file. He gave me a list of items he might need to help crack the encryption, things that could be linked to a password or security key from that era. Among them were personal documents, a birth certificate, social security information, anything that could tie a person to a date. That night, I went home with a singular mission. His request for my birth certificate sent an unexpected jolt through me. My relationship with that particular document is complicated, as it is for many adoptees. The one I possess, the amended one, lists my loving adoptive parents. It's my legal truth, but it's not my biological one. My original birth certificate is sealed by a court order, a ghost document I have never seen, a testament to the part of my story that was deliberately erased. I called my mom again, deciding there was no more room for subtlety. Mom, I need to see my adoption papers. All of them. And my original birth certificate, if you have a copy of it. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and suffocating, thick with unspoken words. Anna, why are you doing this? She finally whispered, and her voice was filled with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. It sounded like pure, unadulterated fear. Because something is deeply wrong, I said, my own voice trembling slightly. At my job with you and Dad on the phone last night. It all circles back to 1995. You know something, Mom? You have to tell me. Please. I heard her begin to cry. Not loud sobs, but soft, choked sounds of someone trying desperately to hold it together. Broke my heart. We promised, she started, her voice barely audible. We promised we would never. We were told it was for the best. To protect you. Protect me from what? I pleaded, my own desperation rising. Just come home this weekend, Anna, she managed to say, her voice thick with tears. Just come home. There's something we should have given you a long, long time ago. A few hours later, just as I was about to fall into a restless sleep, my father called. His voice, normally a calm and steady anchor in my life, was tight with strain. Your mother told me you've been asking questions. We will see you this weekend. Be careful, Anna. He hung up before I could respond. The call left my mind spinning out of control. We promised to protect you. My loving, honest parents, the two people who formed the entire foundation of my world, were part of the secret. They had been hiding something fundamental from me for my entire life. My world, which had started to crack on Tuesday, now felt like it was completely shattering into a million pieces. The laughter of my colleagues felt like a distant, insignificant memory, replaced by a much deeper and more terrifying fear. That my entire life, the very foundation of who I believed myself to be, was a carefully constructed lie. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. Section 4. The Unveiling. The 2-hour drive upstate on Friday felt completely surreal. The familiar landscapes of my childhood, the rolling hills, the familiar turns in the road, looked alien, distorted by the churning dread in my stomach. When I walked through the front door of my childhood home, the silence was deafening. The air was thick with a tension so palpable you could taste it. My parents, usually so physically affectionate and warm, moved around each other like fragile, anxious ghosts. The easy, casual warmth that had always defined our family was simply gone. After a nearly silent dinner that no one really ate, my mother excused herself and went up to the attic. She came back down several minutes later, holding a small, dust-covered wooden box. Her hands were visibly shaking as she placed it on the coffee table in front of me, as if it were a bomb. "The adoption agency gave us this when we brought you home," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The instructions were very specific. We were to give it to you when you were old enough. Or if you started asking questions that we couldn't answer. They said it contained your original records, but that opening it might complicate things." My father sat down beside her. his face etched with a kind of profound pain I had never witnessed before. "We just loved you so much, Anna," he said, his voice cracking. "You were our entire world from the moment we held you. We didn't want anything to complicate our family. Maybe that was selfish of us." My own hands were trembling as I reached for the box and broke the brittle, aged seal. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed legal papers, wasn't a stack of documents. It was a tiny plastic hospital bracelet, the kind they put on newborns, yellowed with age. The name card, where a baby's name would be, had been blacked out by a thick, dark line, a formal court-ordered redaction. But clipped to the fragile plastic band was a small, metal-rimmed tag. 2 characters were stamped into the plastic. Minor female S. As I was staring at that initial, S, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from David Chen, the PI. "Min. The file is bigger than I ever imagined. It's not a memo, Anna. It's a private trust directive. It was created by Alistair Sterling himself, the firm's founder, in August 1995. The trust is for an unnamed heir, an infant, referred to throughout the document only as minor female S." I read the message again, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. Minor female S. The same designation was on the tag I was holding in my hand. It couldn't be a coincidence. My fingers were trembling so hard I could barely hold the phone as I kept reading. "The trust is vast, Anna. Billions. With AB. The directive stipulates that it was to be managed by the firm's acting CFO until the beneficiary's 30th birthday. If the heir is not located by that deadline, the entire trust, principal and all earnings, defaults to the Sterling family estate." The Hemlock Legacy Protocol wasn't just a footnote. It was a failsafe, a final automated search that would be triggered by any internal inquiry before the deadline. Your question in that meeting started the final countdown. Alistair Sterling. I knew his portrait from the conference room wall. Patriarch. The legend. He had died in the early 90s. And the current CFO managing the trust was Walter Finch, Mark's father. Suddenly it was like a bolt of lightning hit me, illuminating everything. All the disconnected pieces slammed together with brutal clarity. Mark wasn't just an arrogant jerk. He was protecting his family's potential 9-figure payday. If I was never found, his family, as managers of the Sterling estate, stood to gain billions. His laughter wasn't about me being naive. It was pure, unadulterated panic. The last part of David's message made my heart stop completely. The directive states the trust and all sealed birth records can be unsealed at the probate court. But there's a bizarre clause. The seal can be overridden immediately by a senior clerk if the claimant presents a credible, tangible link to the trust itself. That sealed envelope you mentioned your parents might have. That could be it. The heavy, wax-sealed envelope that had been sitting under the bracelet. It wasn't just a letter. It was a key. "I have to go," I said, standing up so abruptly my chair screeched against the hardwood floor. My parents just stared at me, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and dawning comprehension. To the city. Right now. The drive back was a frantic 2-hour blur. I clutched that envelope in my hand like it was a vital organ. First thing Saturday morning, I was standing on the steps of the city probate court. I found the senior clerk David had told me to look for, a woman in her 60s with weary eyes that looked like they had seen every form of human drama imaginable. My voice shook as I tried to explain the impossible story, showing her the directive David had emailed me and the wax-sealed envelope my parents had kept hidden for 27 years. She looked from the legal jargon on my phone screen to the strange, ornate wax seal in my hand. Her eyes went wide. "This crest," she said quietly, her voice full of a strange reverence. "I haven't seen this in over 20 years. Level 5 probate seal. The Sterling case." She disappeared into a climate-controlled vault in the back. The seconds stretched into an eternity. When she finally returned, she was holding a single, dust-covered file. With practiced hands, she broke the seal and slid a single document across the marble counter towards me. It was my original, unredacted birth certificate. My eyes frantically scanned the fields, past my birth date, past the hospital name, searching for the names. Mother, Elena Rosales. A name that meant nothing to me. My breath hitched in my throat when I read the next line. Father, Alistair Hemlock Sterling. I had to read it 3 times for the reality to sink in. Alistair Sterling, the legendary founder of my company, the man in the oil painting, was my biological father. And the S on the hospital tag. It wasn't just for Sterling. It was for me. I was minor female S. I was the heir. I was the secret. The clerk wasn't finished. According to the protocol attached to this file, the executor of the trust must be notified immediately once the heir has been positively identified, she said gently, already picking up the phone. Yes, I need to be connected to the office of Mr. Walter Finch. Walter Finch. Sifo. Mark's father. The man who had been managing my inheritance my entire life. Just waiting and perhaps hoping for the clock to run out. That 72-hour countdown wasn't for a corporate protocol. It was a countdown to the end of his family's secret. And the game was over. Section 5. The confrontation and the truth. Walking back through the glass doors of the Sterling and Finch building that Saturday afternoon was a surreal, out-of-body experience. The imposing portraits of the founders that lined the hallways no longer seemed intimidating. They felt like family portraits. The immense power that hummed within the walls was no longer a force I had to fight against. It was my birthright. My legacy. The court had already arranged the meeting. Walter Finch and his son Mark were waiting for me in the very same conference room where they had laughed at me 3 days earlier. This time no one was laughing. Walter Finch looked like an older, more defeated version of his son. He had the same cold, calculating eyes, but today they were clouded with weary resignation. Mark stood beside him, his face ashen. His usual slick arrogance completely stripped away, replaced by a raw, ugly fury that radiated off him in waves. Anna, Walter began, his voice raspy and strained. Or, I suppose it's Sterling now. There are things you need to understand. Oh, I think I understand plenty, I said, my voice ringing out with a newfound authority that I didn't even know I possessed. I understand that you have been managing a multi-billion-dollar trust in my name for 27 years. I understand that you were just months away from my 30th birthday, the day my inheritance would have defaulted to the Sterling estate, which I am guessing your family would have had a very nice, very large claim on. Mark lunged forward a step. You have no idea what you're talking about. My father upheld his fiduciary duty to the letter. He was bound by the terms of the trust Alistair created. And were you bound by your duty when you and your colleagues humiliated me in a meeting for the sole purpose of scaring me away from my own life story? I shot back, locking my eyes onto his. Was that part of the protocol? Laugh at the founder's long-lost daughter so she doesn't accidentally trip over the billion-dollar truth. Was that decorum? Mark actually flinched as if I'd slapped him. Walter held up a weary hand, silencing his son. He was wrong, he said quietly, looking directly at me for the first time. He was arrogant and cruel and wrong. But he was also a son trying to protect his family. Alistair Sterling was a brilliant man, but he was complicated. When your mother, a young junior analyst at this firm named Elena Rosales, became pregnant, he panicked. This was 1995. A scandal of that magnitude would have destroyed his reputation and threatened the stability of the entire firm. So he created a story. He then laid out the entire breathtaking architecture of the secret. Alistair had engineered the whole thing from his deathbed. The discreet, closed adoption to a loving family far from his world. The massive, secret trust to provide for me without ever having to publicly claim me. He built the Hemlock Protocol, named after his own middle name, as a ghost in the machine, a final, desperate failsafe to find me before the deadline if the secret ever began to unravel. And Walter, his most loyal friend and CFO, was made the executor and sworn to absolute, unbreakable secrecy. The plan was for you to live a normal, happy life, to never know the burden of this world, Walter said, his voice trailing off. Your adoptive parents were only told that you came from a powerful family and that for your own safety and well-being, the past had to remain buried. They were given the box as a final measure of last resort. Alistair died shortly after you were born, and the secret was locked away with him. So you just sat back and waited? I asked. The sheer audacity of it all was still hard to comprehend. You just hoped I'd never find out. Hoped that billions of dollars would just quietly fall into your family's lap. It wasn't like that at the beginning, Walter insisted, but his eyes told a different story. It was a solemn responsibility. But that responsibility slowly became a temptation. As the years went by and the trust grew into a fortune, and you were still just a ghost in a sealed file, the lines got blurry. I looked over at Mark, at his clenched fists and the pure resentment burning in his eyes. He grew up knowing about me, the phantom heiress. He watched my inheritance balloon year after year, seeing it not as my birthright, but as a prize his family was dutifully guarding. My showing up at the firm, a black woman with the last name of my adoptive parents, must have been his worst nightmare. A ghost from the past walking right into his life. When I asked that question in the meeting, I wasn't just an analyst. I was the living, breathing threat he had been conditioned to fear and neutralize his entire life. His laughter wasn't just condescending. It was a weapon, born from a lifetime of greed and a moment of pure, unadulterated fear. The 72-hour protocol I had accidentally triggered was my salvation. It had initiated a legal process that the Finches were powerless to stop. The clock that had started with their dismissive laughter had finally run out. And the truth, after 27 years in the dark, had finally won in the span of 72 chaotic hours. I went from being Anna, the ambitious analyst everyone was so quick to overlook, to Anna Sterling, the heir to a fortune so vast it felt unreal. But this was no fairy tale. This was a painful, brutal excavation of my own past, and it has unearthed truths that have irrevocably changed everything. I learned that my biological father chose to protect his legacy over acknowledging his daughter, but in his own strange way. He also left me a secret, complicated map to find my way back home. I learned that my adoptive parents, whom I love more than words can say, carried the agonizing weight of a life-altering secret to protect me. A choice born of love that I am only now beginning to comprehend. And I learned that the casual cruelty and dismissive laughter of a few powerful men in a boardroom can sometimes be the very key that unlocks your entire destiny. My identity is no longer just about being the adopted girl, the outlier. It's the story of a woman who was hidden away, who was laughed at, and who, against all imaginable odds, found her way back to the truth. The name Sterling gives me power I never asked for and a seat at a table I used to have to fight just to stand near. But my real inheritance, the thing that truly matters, was never the money. It was the truth. It was finally, after a lifetime of wondering, getting an answer to the question that has haunted every quiet moment of my life. Where do I come from? Now I know. And with that answer, I can finally start writing the next chapter, not as a secret or a footnote in someone else's story, but as the author of my own. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.